There are some legends that spread like wildfire on the internet. Tales whispered in the darkest corners of social media, creeping their way into our nightmares. Some are made up, others are far more real than anyone could ever imagine. One of those chilling stories is the legend of Jeff the Killer. You've probably heard the basics, the story of a shy teen, misunderstood by the world, who becomes a killer after a horrific turn of events. It's the classic version, the one that's been passed around for years. But what if I told you that the real story is darker and far more terrifying than what you've been led to believe? This is not the usual story of Jeff the Killer. No, this is the story of someone who came face to face with him and lived to tell the tale. Or, at least, that's what he claims. Let me introduce you to someone I met online. A guy named Mark. He wasn't anything special. Just a normal guy, living in a small, sleepy town that didn't make headlines. Mark's life was simple. He didn't have many friends. In fact, he mostly kept to himself, playing video games, scrolling through social media, and binging whatever show he was into at the time. He liked his quiet life, but that peace didn't last. It started one autumn evening. Mark had just gotten home from work, tired, wanting nothing more than to relax. As he sat down at his computer, something caught his eye, a message. It wasn't from anyone he recognized. The account name was something odd, S-JeffTheKiller-X. Mark almost ignored it. He thought it was just some random spam, maybe a bot. But curiosity got the better of him. So he clicked. The message was brief, simple even. It read, "I know who you are, Mark. I've been watching you." Mark froze. He stared at the screen, unsure if it was a prank, a friend messing with him, or maybe it was some hacker trying to scare him. It didn't matter. He wasn't afraid. He was annoyed. He quickly closed the chat window, laughed it off, and went back to his usual routine. No big deal. That night, though, things started to get strange. It was late, maybe around 1 a.m., when Mark began to hear sounds coming from the other side of his bedroom door. He tried to ignore it, but the sounds persisted. Quiet at first, like faint whispers, then the unmistakable sound footsteps, slow, deliberate, as if someone was walking around outside his room. Mark's heart began to race. He knew his house well, and no one should have been there. His parents had long since gone to bed, and he lived alone in a quiet neighborhood. He stood up, slowly, trying not to make any noise. His hand trembled as he grabbed the doorknob. He opened the door, but there was nothing. Just a long, dark hallway leading to an empty living room. He stepped out into the hall, feeling the chill of the night air. His eyes scanned every corner, every shadow. Nothing, but deep down, he could feel it. The presence. Someone or something was out there. He shrugged off. Maybe it was just his mind playing tricks on him. He went back to his room, locked the door, and tried to sleep. The next morning, he woke up with the same uneasy feeling. Something was off, but he couldn't quite place it. He went through his usual routine, getting ready for work, grabbing breakfast, but all the while, his mind kept drifting back to that strange message from the night before. It wasn't until later that afternoon, when Mark checked his phone, that things really started to get strange. There in his inbox was another message from the same account. "I told you, Mark. You can't escape me." Panic washed over him. This wasn't just some prank. It was real. Whoever this person was, they knew things about him. Things no one should have known. He rushed to his front door, checked the locks, and made sure everything was secure. But nothing felt safe. That night, Mark stayed up late, his eyes glued to his phone, waiting for something, anything, to explain what was happening. He was scrolling through his social media when he saw a post that made his blood run cold. It was a photo, a grainy image of a man standing in the shadows, his face obscured by darkness. But there was something about the eyes. They were wide open, unblinking. The figure was wearing a hoodie, but Mark could see the faint outline of a face, pale, sickly, and disturbingly familiar. The caption read, "I'm always watching Mark." Mark's stomach twisted. He felt sick. His fingers trembled as he tapped the screen to open the profile of the person who posted it. The account had no name, just a blank profile picture and a chilling tagline. You can't hide from me." Desperate for answers, Mark tried to block the account, but it didn't work. Every time he tried, more messages would pop up, more photos would appear. The relentless barrage of threats and cryptic messages continued, each one more disturbing than the last. As the days passed, Mark began to lose track of time. He wasn't sleeping. He was constantly looking over his shoulder, jumping at every creak of the floorboards. He felt like he was being watched, like eyes were on him no matter where he went. Then the tapping started. It was subtle at first, just a soft tapping on his window. Mark tried to ignore it. It could have been a branch, a bird, anything, but it wasn't. The tapping became louder, more persistent. It was as though someone or something was deliberately trying to get his attention. One night, around 2 a.m., Mark couldn't take it any longer. He opened his bedroom window, the cold air rushing in. He peered outside, but the night was dark, too dark. He couldn't see anything. No one was there. But then, a voice, a whisper, so low that he barely heard it. "Mark, I see you." His heart stopped. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. He slammed the window shut and backed away, panic flooding his senses. He was paralyzed with fear. He turned around, and there, standing in the doorway of his room, was a figure. The figure was tall, unnervingly thin, and draped in a dark hoodie. The face was obscured by the shadows, but Mark could see it now, the wide, hollow eyes staring at him from the darkness. And then the voice again. "I told you. I'm coming for you." Mark tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He couldn't breathe. The world seemed to close in on him, and then everything went black. When he woke up, Mark was no longer in his room. He was somewhere else, somewhere dark and cold. His body ached. His mind was foggy. He tried to stand up, but he stumbled, falling onto the hard ground. His heart raced as his eyes adjusted to the dim light. He was in an old, abandoned building. The air was thick with dust, the walls cracked and peeling. He looked around, but there was no sign of anyone, no sign of the figure. But then, he heard the voice again. "You shouldn't have run, Mark. I told you I would find you." Mark's blood ran cold. He didn't know where he was or how he got there, but he knew one thing. He wasn't alone. Jeff the Killer had found him. And now, there was nowhere to hide. The last message Mark sent, just before his phone died, was a desperate cry for help. It read, "Jeff, please, I'm sorry. I didn't know. Please don't kill me." That was the last anyone heard from him. The authorities searched for days. They scoured the area. They interviewed his friends and family, but there was no sign of Mark, no trace. It was as if he had vanished off the face of the earth. Some say that if you listen closely, if you hear the faintest tapping on your window, if you feel a cold breath on the back of your neck, then it's already too late. You've already been marked. You've already caught the attention of Jeff the Killer. And once he sees you, he will never let you go. I had always heard strange stories about what lurks in the shadows, but I never thought they would one day concern me. Until that night when everything changed. It was a typical evening, just like any other. I was coming home after a long day at work, tired and drained. The usual routine. Nothing extraordinary at first glance, but something felt different that night. A strange air hung in the atmosphere, a kind of heaviness I couldn't explain. The streets were quieter than usual, with barely a soul around. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath. I live in an old house, nestled between two buildings on a quiet street. The house was never particularly comforting, with its creaking floors, narrow hallways, and dimly lit rooms. But it was home. For years, I had grown used to its oddities, the occasional flicker of the lights, and the soft hum of the old plumbing. I had convinced myself that the house was simply old, nothing more. But tonight felt different. The rain was relentless, drumming against the windows with a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate, as if something was trying to get my attention. The streetlights outside flickered in the thick fog, casting weak pools of light on the wet pavement. The world felt distant, muted, as if I were the only one left, stranded in an empty universe. I threw my bag on the couch and poured myself a cup of tea, hoping to unwind. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence. A message. At first, I didn't think much of it, but the name that appeared on my screen was unfamiliar. There was no contact name, just a string of numbers. You know what hides in the shadows, don't you? My thumb hovered over the screen. The message was strange, cryptic, unsettling. I almost ignored it, chalking it up to some weird spam message or a prank. But something in my gut told me to reply. Maybe it was the unease creeping into my thoughts, or maybe I just wanted to entertain the possibility that it was coincidence. Who are you? I typed back, trying to sound nonchalant. A few seconds later, the reply came. This time, it wasn't just text. A photo was attached. I stared at it for a moment, unsure of what I was seeing. It was distorted, warped, as if the photo had been taken in a rush or manipulated. The image was dark, filled with shadows, but in the center, I could make out a figure. At first glance, it seemed like a man, but something was wrong. His face, if you could even call it a face, was completely hollow. Two empty eye sockets where his eyes should have been, dark, deep, and devoid of life. I couldn't look away, even though a part of me screamed too. The photo was chilling, and my pulse quickened. It's already too late, the message read. I stared at the screen, frozen. The room around me seemed to grow colder, the air thickening. My heart began to race, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was watching me. I glanced around the room, but everything seemed normal. The ticking of the clock on the wall, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the faint rustling of leaves outside in the wind. Yet, something felt off. Then I heard it, a sound distant at first, but growing louder. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate steps coming from upstairs. My blood ran cold. My first instinct was to dismiss it as the house settling, the old wood creaking in the damp weather. But this was different. These footsteps were too real, too purposeful. I dropped my phone on the couch and stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps continued, rhythmic, steady. I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy lamp, from the side table. It felt ridiculous, but I didn't know what else to do. My thoughts were a mess, scrambling for logic, for an explanation, but there was nothing that made sense. The sound of those steps filled my ears, echoing down the hallway, and I realized they were coming closer. I made my way up the stairs, my legs trembling with each step. The house was dark, the kind of dark that presses against your chest, like you're not supposed to be there. The shadows stretched unnaturally long across the walls. The stairs creaked under my weight, and the silence seemed to deepen with every movement I made. I reached the top, heart racing, and turned toward the bedroom. The door was ajar, and from within came a low, almost imperceptible sound, a muffled whisper. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I could feel my skin prickle with fear, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I slowly pushed the door open, trying not to make a sound. The room was dimly lit by the faint glow of the streetlight outside, but something was wrong. The window was wide open, even though the rain was still coming down in sheets. A chill swept through the room, and I shivered. It was like the room had been disturbed. I stepped inside, my eyes scanning the room. At first, I couldn't make out much. But then, in the center of the room, I saw it. A dark stain on the floor. Blood. A pool of dark, sticky blood. My stomach turned, and I felt the bile rise in my throat. I stumbled backward, my mind racing to understand what was happening. My heart was pounding so loudly, I could barely hear anything else. I turned around, and that's when I saw him. He was standing in the far corner of the room, partially obscured by shadows. His clothes were torn, his body gaunt, but it was his face, or rather, the absence of a face, that caught my attention. Two black, empty sockets where his eyes should have been. There was no skin, no flesh around them, just darkness. It was like looking into an abyss. I couldn't breathe. My body was frozen, my legs unwilling to move. He wasn't moving, just standing there. His presence was overwhelming, suffocating. The silence was unbearable. I should have run, screamed, fought, but I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. I tried to speak, to scream, but nothing came out. My throat was tight, my voice swallowed by the terror gnawing at me. Then, his head tilted slightly, as if sensing my fear. He took a step forward, and another. He moved with unnerving precision, the air around him growing colder with each step. My heartbeat thundered in my chest as I took a step back, but there was no escape. He was too close. His presence was a crushing weight, and I could feel it pressing on my chest. The room seemed to spin, and I staggered backward, my vision blurring. His hand shot out, long fingers with sharp, black nails. I felt the cold touch on my shoulder, like death itself reaching out to claim me. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The suffocating silence was enough. I could hear the sound of my own breathing, shallow and panicked, and then I felt it, a sharp, searing pain in my side. He was cutting me, slowly, deliberately. I didn't feel it at first, but then I saw the blood, dark and thick, staining my shirt, pooling around my feet. I screamed, but no sound came out. My body felt heavy, distant, as though I were sinking into the darkness. I fell to the floor, my vision fading. But just before I lost consciousness, I saw his face again, those empty, hollow sockets. And then, his voice, soft, like a whisper in the wind. "You're mine now."